Hello, my name is Elle Bellinger, and for the Module 3 reflection, I decided to make a video answering the questions and just talking about my experiences. So the first question is, what experience impacted you the most? And I feel like overall as a whole, especially like in this week in this module, I really was able to get in personal connection with all of my students. I've been really getting to know them more, getting to know their hobbies, interests, not just like for one specific focused student, but I've been getting to know all of them. During the Valentine's Day party, there was one student in particular who I really started hanging out with. You know, she asked to bring her chair over to my desk and she was showing me all the Valentines that she got, and it was really sweet. When the day was over, my mentor teacher told me that she was really proud of that student for doing so because she has a single dad. Her mom's not really in the picture, and so she struggles to make connections with like female role models. And so my teacher said that she was really happy that I was able to kind of make that connection with her. And I didn't like know any of her family life aspects going into this. I was just, getting to know the student and hanging out with her, and she's a really sweet little girl. And so I just feel like overall this unit, I just really got to know my students on such a much more personal level. They want to hang out with me. They're asking for my help on assignments. They say bye to me at the end of the day. They're getting to know my name. And so it's just been really sweet, and I've been really enjoying that part. So the next question is, what should be the concerns of teachers who want to create classrooms and implement practices that are culturally sustaining for students of color who are linguistically and culturally flexible across multiple language varieties and cultural ways of being? And so I think the main way that teachers should implement these practices to support these students is to have a classroom that is in support of all different cultures. And this could look like, having posters in multiple languages, listening to music from all different types of cultures. And if you have a student that is, from one specific culture that, the other students might not be a part of, giving them an opportunity to speak on it and educate others, ultimately just making all of the students feel welcome in their identities, but also teaching them about new identities, even if none of the students are from that culture. I think an example of this would be this week was Lunar New Year. And although none of the students in my classroom are of Asian descent, we still had a whole day and we talked about it, and we taught them about the history of Chinese New Year. We talked about the zodiac signs. We also talked about food from Chinese culture. We brought in chopsticks. We brought in fortune cookies. We showed them the red envelopes. We even had like pictures of Chinese money to show them. And so I think ultimately just making a classroom where any type of student of any cultural background will feel welcome and affirmed, but also teaching them about new identities, because that's ultimately how we learn as humans, is we learn about each other. And so I think teachers should be comfortable in not only affirming their own students' cultural identities, but being able to teach students about other cultural identities. I think that would be the best way to do so. So the next question is, how do we support students in sustaining the cultural and linguistic competence of their communities while still at the same time providing them access to dominant cultural competence? And I feel like this question kind of goes with the last question, because basically the best way to support these students is to provide instruction and make your classroom environment a way that is in support of both of their cultural identities. Obviously, you're teaching in English and teaching them new things, but you're also allowing them to speak whatever their language may be. In this case, all of my students speak Spanish, allowing them to speak Spanish in the classroom. Me and my mentor teacher were constantly learning new Spanish words from the students. And so I think just basically, not even just for this one example of my classroom, but any classroom where you have students from a different culture, allowing them to express who they are and express their culture and their language. I think that's really important because it teaches them, hey, we may be learning English, we may be talking about these things that you might not be so familiar with, but just because you're learning these things doesn't mean that what you already know isn't equally as important, and you need to hang on to that because that's a part of your identity. And so I think just supporting them in their culture and speaking their native language is the best way to basically support their cultural and linguistic competence. So the next question is, which students do you notice tend to have power struggles and/or discipline issues? Why do you think this happens, and what do you think drives the students' behavior that makes it difficult for them in the classroom? I'm just kind of going more of this off of personal experience. I feel like the students in my class that tend to have power struggles are students that are actually maybe higher in academic achievement. And I think this may be because they don't feel challenged. When students don't feel challenged to learn more, they're looking for another outlet to express themselves. So this can be, acting out, being a little slightly disruptive, because they don't feel challenged in their academics. So they feel like they need to feel challenged in other ways. That's basically why I think this happens. In terms of what do I think that drives their behaviors that makes it difficult, it could be many other behaviors. Obviously, students who struggle with discipline, it's not solely just because they aren't feeling challenged academically. Some students could be having struggles at home, family problems, and that could lead to stress and anxiety, which can manifest as acting out in the classroom. A lot of students who are acting out may not be getting enough support at home, and so that's why they're acting out at school. Another example is there's one student in my classroom who was underperforming, that especially compared to last semester, as my mentor teacher says, is because her mother just had a baby. And so she's probably taking care of the baby a lot at home. Her parents are really focused on that baby. And so because of that, she's not performing as well academically. So ultimately, it can be a variety of reasons, I think. But what from I'm personally noticed, it's definitely due to, either not feeling challenged enough academically or things that are going on at home. So the next question is, why do factors like race and class continue to be strong predictors of achievement when gender disparities have shrunken in the past? And I think race and class continue to be predictors of achievement because they are so deeply embedded within the economic and structural systems of our society. And although we are actively fighting to make those change, these are lasting struggles that still have an impact on students today. Socioeconomic status can affect things like school funding, stable housing, and healthcare. All of these can impact one's academic performance because, if you don't have stable housing, if, members of your family are sick and they don't have the resources that is going to affect your academic performance. School funding and the quality of the school is also heavily tied with neighborhood wealth, and that further reinforces the class divide. Students from lower income areas aren't getting the same education as students from higher income areas. And then so that I feel like covers the class part. In terms of racial disparities, those are shaped by historical segregation that again still have lasting effects today. One example could be the Brown versus the Board of Education. And I think although legal segregation still technically ended, many communities are still divided by race and income. And then I think these long-lasting inequalities, they limit access to opportunities and resources, which ultimately makes race and class a more persistent predictor of academic achievement than gender. So the final question is basically just what additional questions have surfaced for you? And I feel like the main thing that I've just been thinking throughout this unit is what would be the best way to manage having true bilingual students in the classroom and knowing when to provide instruction in English, in Spanish, or in English and Spanish. And I know, obviously if I were a dual immersion teacher I'm sure there's specific trainings and practices and procedures, but I just wonder about how it looks like actually in action, because although all of my students speak Spanish, 100% of their instruction is in English because they're in second grade at this point. There are some students that are not as English proficient as others, but all of them know and speak enough English to the point where that instruction can be given in English and they are able to do well with it. Of course, we also have like BIAs, bilingual instructional assistants, so they do provide kind of that scaffolding in Spanish if it is needed for the students. But I think just because although I do have a lot of Spanish speakers in my class, I would like to see what it looks like in a classroom where instruction is also provided in Spanish and how that can benefit the kids and how it can be different from what I'm currently experiencing. And also, this is a lot more of like a far out question, but I just wonder what it would look like in a classroom if you hypothetically got a student who transferred here and like, say they speak German and nothing else, and how as a teacher would you handle that? How would you approach it? What would be the first thing you would do? Because that student would be the only student in that entire room that speaks that language. It's not like it's a bunch of students together that speak one language. It's just one. And so I kind of just wonder about how that would work in practice. I guess maybe I could do some research and find out, but I don't know. That was just a question that I thought of and surfaced for me. So yeah, those were my answers of all of the questions for Module 3. I really enjoyed this module. I feel like it taught me a lot, especially being from a town where a lot of the population speaks a language other than English, and knowing that I'm probably going to encounter this a lot in my career. I thought it was really important to learn these type of things, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, thank you.